Thoughts on Lauma for hyperbloom for a newer account? No Yelan and Raiden. No Raiden doesn't really matter that much. No Yelan could be a big deal. I am going to have to do a lot of testing on Lauma hyperbloom team for people who don't have Yelan. I'm not sure what the best second Hydro would be for those teams. Unironically, the fact that Ino nerfs Lauma's passive is so bad for those teams. It's so bad. You would use Ino otherwise, because Ino would actually be good. But losing the 15% crit to Hyperloom is really bad. Would be Flins' ER requirement for Big Burst at C1R1? The thing is, you can't do Big Burst at C1R1. Like, at C1, just at C1 in general, you need to understand, right? Your skill cooldown is 4 seconds. Your skill duration is 10 seconds. Like, the Manifest Flame form duration is 10 seconds. In order to actually use 3 of the 4 second cooldown special skill, the Northland Spear Storm, right? You need to use 1 at the start, then like 4 point something seconds later you use the second one, and then 4 point something seconds later you use the third one, right? So that's like 9-ish seconds that needs to happen that way. If you add a big burst at the start, that 9-ish seconds is now cooked as fuck because, well, you now have 2 seconds of burst animation, and then you have 9 seconds, and that goes over 10 seconds. So then you'd have to use the burst before entering your skill stance. But that means you can't pre-funnel any energy, which actually increases your ER requirements even more. I would not recommend... And then on top of all of that, right? Your big burst is about the same amount of damage as your mini burst. I mean, it's a tiny bit more, but effectively, all things considered, it's basically the same, right? We'll consider it the same, but we'll round up. By default, you get 2 mini bursts, and so getting the big burst rotation increases your burst damage in that rotation by about 50%. But the C1 doesn't increase the big burst damage. It increases the rest. So you now have 3 mini bursts. And getting a big burst on top of that, instead of a 50% motion value increase, it's now a 33% motion value increase. So it's harder to make work, and it represents less of an upgrade. In most, if not all situations at C1, you don't use the big burst. You can use a big burst if you're against an enemy that gives you a fuck ton of particles in between mini bursts, right? If you go back to full energy right after using a mini burst, you can use a big burst then, right? Against enemies that give you a fuck ton of particles, right? Against a Wayob, against I mean, I don't know if you guys knew, but the Cryo Secret Source Automaton, when you get it below the low temperature threshold on its like cryo bar, it gives you a lot of particles. If they make more enemies like that give you a lot of particles under a specific situation, you could use those particles for something on Flins. And you could do that even at C1, but you don't want to extend your rotation. If you have to extend your rotation to use the big burst, it's not worth it. You have to fit it in somewhere for it to be worth it. So yeah, all of that to say, at C1, generally, you don't really build for the big burst. There will be situations where it is optimal to use them, or to use it, but most of the time, you just ignore it. Almost passive don't stack the crit on blooms and lunar bloom damage buff. The crit on blooms and the crit on lunar bloom passive, you only get one of them. You don't get both. Thoughts about hyperfrige with Razor as your main trigger? That's kind of sus. I like the idea though, like going for shatters instead of overloads. But the reason why Razor has been a good option for Thundering Fury is because on top of the reactions you get normally, you also get reactions from Self-Elemental Infusion, right? So like not only do you get additional reactions from Razor having a coordinated attack that hits at the same frequency as his actual attacks, but isn't an infusion, so you get hit with 2 elements at once, right?
I'll use my fire to dry you off.
But you also self-infuse, so you get additional overloads on yourself. You get additional reactions in hyperfrige. Yeah, but you don't get any reactions from... You don't get any reactions from the self-elemental application. And you don't really get Shatter and Superconduct, right? Oh, nice. But yeah, as I was trying to say, you don't really get Shatter and Superconduct, because in order to get Superconduct, you need to trigger Frozen, and if you trigger Frozen, it likely means you didn't trigger... Superconduct. And your Electro app is generally going to be faster than your Cryo app, because our Cryo applicators aren't the best. So you will get more Superconducts than you get Shatters, and your Electro character, or sorry, your Cryo character will be the one getting the reaction. So you will get to, like, triple dip into building Razor on EM like you do in Thundering Fury. Basically, it sounds cool, but it just doesn't really work. The unfortunate reality is, if you ever want to have a team that focuses on Shatter as a relevant portion of your team DPS, well, it will never be actually viable because bosses can't be frozen, so they can't be shattered. So if you wanted to make something, you'd have to make it so that you can trigger Shatter on bosses somehow. But 2, it would have to be a character that's either Hydro or Cryo themselves. You would want to maximize your application of both Cryo and Hydro, so that every single blunt attack triggers a Shatter. Like, if you had a relatively fast Cryo application character, you could use them with Singto and, like, Eon San or some shit. Right? Give a passive that converts attack to EM. Give them somewhat decent synergy with the Electro buffers, so that they can trigger Superconduct without off-field application. Make them Cryo. That's how you design a Shatter-focused character with the current units we have. You could also just make it so that the character just fucking has a passive that says Shatters deal 83,000 times more damage. But, like, that's lazy. I really do, like, I've talked about this before. I really do think that they should have given Escoffier a passive that allows the Frozen reaction to do something slightly different against bosses, but actually do something. Right? Like, give Frozen a property like Quicken, where it just gets applied as an aura. And even if the enemy doesn't get frozen, like, it doesn't get the effect of, like, not moving anymore because they're frozen, it still gets a frozen aura. Because, like, the frozen does work like Quicken. It is an aura. And it is a unique aura. It's just that aura can't be applied on bosses. Instead of that aura not being able to be applied on bosses, it would be better if the aura could be applied on bosses, but bosses with the aura could still move. That should be a general thing, not a character passive. Yes and no. I kind of agree that it should be a general thing, but I also could understand if they didn't want to make it a general thing. Like, I don't hate the idea of bad reactions being used to balance out elemental interactions. Right? Because, like, Shatter's purpose in 1.0 Genshin is to make freeze worse. Right? And I don't think that's an inherently bad thing for the game. Right? Burning's purpose in 3.0 Genshin is mainly to make Burgeon worse. Well, like, that sort of thing makes sense, because if Burning worked the same way that Electrocharge does, Burgeon would just be objectively better than Hyperbloom. Because why would you ever play a reaction that is single target if it does exactly the same thing as another reaction that's AoE? Now, that doesn't mean I don't think that Burgeon should be better than Hyperbloom, right? Like, it's fine for one reaction to be better than another. But they would have had to design it differently if Burning didn't work the way it does. Did the people creating Burgeon thought it would go crazy on Vapes? No, I think, okay. People very often dismiss Hoyo's balance. Right? people write off Bennett and Xiangling as mistakes. I think that you're just not giving them enough credit. Like, I understand that I'm a theory crafter, and I've made it my job to optimize units the past few years, right? But like, it doesn't take this amount of attachment to realize that a character that gives a 1202 attack buff is going to be strong when the total attack you end up at on a general attack scaling characters is generally somewhere between 2 and 3,000, right? Like, increasing your attack by more than 50%, it doesn't take a genius to realize that's pretty good. Things are a little bit more complicated with reactions and the way they interact, but you also need to understand, like, they nerfed burning in 3.0. They didn't nerf burning by accident. They nerfed burning intentionally. There was a purpose to the burning nerf. And it's pretty obvious that when you look at what happened and the effect, right, you can somewhat guess what the intent was. And from that intent, you can pretty clearly see they kind of know what they're doing, right? If it wasn't for the burning nerf, burning would have been insane at, like, by itself, fully sustaining pretty much any amount of application that is not Hydro. How was burning nerf? Burning used to refresh the 2U Pyro Aura every time it ticked. Which means that you could have a fucking Fischl and who's a fast cryo? Ayaka? I mean, I think Ayaka's a good example, actually. You could have, you could use Ayaka Burst. You could have done, like, Bennett, Nahida, Ayaka something, and swapping to Ayaka, like, after one Bennett E, the Pyro would stay on the enemy permanently, basically, until your Dendro runs out. And it doesn't run out with Nahida, really.